Ubiquiti has improved a lot when it comes to syslog. Of course, Ubiquiti doesn't like the industry widely used term. Instead, it uses activity logging here. This setting you see here, what Ubiquiti really means is to export syslog to SIEM server. I'm going to use 3 videos to cover this topic. What you are watching now is the first video. In the second one, I will talk about the SIEM server versus net console. Then in the third one, I will compare CEF logs and regular plain syslogs. In this video, I will first show you how the syslog exporting to SIEM server works in action. I'm going to use Wireshark to capture the syslog packets so that we can understand where the syslogs are from. In the second part of the video, we will discuss for different types of UniFi network devices, how the syslogs are exported and what types of syslogs are exported. In the third part of the video, we will compare the seemingly identical activity logging in the network application and in the control plane. Let's try to understand their differences. This is my lab environment. This is a UDM Pro. I run it behind my main firewall, the production environment, which is the yellow area. In the production environment, I already have a graylog server. This is its IP address. So in this video, I'm going to use this green lab environment to export the syslogs to the production graylog. I'm going to run 2 separate Wiresharks. One will monitor the WAN part of the lab gateway. The other one will monitor the LAN part of the lab gateway. In the first example scenario, let me show you a syslog regarding custom firewall policies. If I go to policy engine, as you can see for firewall, from internal to internal, I have a block inter VLAN custom firewall policy. Then if I go to the cyber secure, for traffic logging, you can see by default, the activity logging is off. If I switch on the SIEM server, for the server address, I specify the existing graylog server's IP address. I'm going to use the default 514 for the syslog server. Then when it comes to contents, for the first example, let me only select the trigger because I know the logs for custom firewall policies are in the triggers category. So save it, apply changes. Then in the lower left Wireshark, let me start capturing. To make it easy, the way I'm going to capture the packets is by using SSH remote capturing. This Wireshark will directly connect to the UDM Pro. In the remote capturing setting, I specify the UDM Pro's IP address and the root credentials. When it comes to capture, this is the remote interface I'm interested in. For the first example, I'm only going to run this particular Wireshark, which is supposed to monitor the WAN part, right? So you may know Ethernet 9 means port 10 in UDM Pro, which is exactly the WAN part of my lab environment. For the remote capture command, it's TCP dump. And here I specify port 514 because I specify it in the server setting, right? Let me start capturing. You can see the system, it is busy exporting logs already. In the right side Linux virtual machine, it belongs to VLAN 66. Let me simply ping a VLAN 88 IP address. Because of our block inter VLAN firewall policy, this ping will fail, right? Let me run it. And then see in the left, we see the so-called triggers or syslogs for the custom firewall policies. So it's successful. Let me stop capturing. Then if you want to see what's inside, let me click on a random one. You can see the protocol is syslog. It uses UDP. And then let's check the syslog section. First part is the facility. If you watched my previous video regarding how syslog works, inside UniFi gateway, you may know it is for Linux to determine the nature of the syslog. Then the second field is level. The severity for this syslog is notice. Of course, you have timestamp. It's in my local time zone. This is important. For your SIM server, it may get syslogs from multiple sources, and your multiple sources may be in different time zones. So it's crucial to make sure the SIM server won't get confused. It enforces the time zone setting. Then the host name, very important. We will use this field to determine where the log comes from. The very last part is the real content of the syslog, the message itself. If you are familiar with IP tables or backend syslogs, you will understand that this is just regular firewall related syslogs. Okay, the first example is very simple. Because we know this syslog is generated from the gateway itself, so we only run one Wireshark instance. We already see the syslogs. Let me move on to the second example. I'm going to use a cell phone to connect to Wi-Fi for this lab environment. The syslog for this activity will be sent directly from the AP to the graylog. However, because this lab environment is behind this main gateway, for the AP to communicate with the graylog, the traffic has to go through the router, go through this lab gateway. So that's why I'm going to run two Wiresharks. The first one still monitor this one part. The second one, the new one, will be monitoring the LAN part of this lab environment. Then let's compare the captured packets for the two Wiresharks so that we can understand what really happens. In UniFi network application, in order to log the Wi-Fi related connection activities, I need to change the contents for activity logging. Instead of enabling triggers, I need to enable clients. Save it, apply changes. Now in the lower part, two Wireshark sessions. In the left side one, let me show you the remote SSH capturing again. It's the same setting, capturing one part. Started. Then in the right side, let me show you the setting. Under capture, instead of capturing one part, here I'm capturing BR0. Inside UniFi gateway, BR0 means the bridge interface for default network. That's exactly where the access point is in. So that's why I want to capture this particular interface, BR0. And in the same way, I want to filter the packets to port 514. Let me start it. On my cell phone, now I'm not connected to this lab environment. So let me connect to the SSID of this lab environment. Okay, you can see immediately many syslogs are being logged in both Wiresharks, right? Let me stop capturing in both Wiresharks. Stop the left side one first, then the right side one. Okay, then you can see for all the packets you can see in the right side, they are the syslogs reported by the AP itself. It needs to communicate with the graylog directly, but because this green lab environment is behind this yellow production environment, the traffic has to go through the one part of the lab gateway. That's why for all the packets you see in the right side, you can see the identical ones in the left side, right? That makes sense. However, near the end of the left side session, see what's this? This is a CEF log, and it's about UniFi network Wi-Fi client connection, and it's sent directly from the gateway, not AP. So you can see this daemon.infer is identical to this right side daemon.infer, right? Remember, I ended the capturing for the right side Wireshark later, right? The left side Wireshark did have additional syslogs which didn't exist in the right side. This CF log is one of them. It's sent from the gateway. That's why you don't see it in the right side. Go back to activity logging setting. How you can relate all the captured packets in both the left and the right side Wiresharks to the setting. Everything you see from the right side, they are the result of this setting. See this grayed out access points? By default, it's enabled. You have no option to disable it. Everything you see in the right side is the result of this access points option. However, for some of the syslogs, for example, this highlighted CEF logs, it's the result of this setting. The clients which you have influence, you can choose to enable or disable them. So just want to explain you two different things. First, why the left side and the right side, they are almost identical, but they have differences because the syslogs were sent from different devices. Second thing is you need to understand for a given syslog, it's a result of what option in this content setting. That's it for the second testing. Besides the syslog exporting functionality, UniFi network application also supports directly showing the logs. If you click on logs, you can see all different categories of logs. Here I'm showing you security related ones. All this information is stored in the UDM Pro in MongoDB. And for some information, if for the activity logging, instead of saying SIM server, you select the internally stored, the system will store them in respective log files in the operating system inside UDM Pro. So let me SSH to UDM Pro. If you go to VAR log, you can see a whole bunch of different logs, right? And more specifically, if you go to ulog, you can see the logs generated by the process ulogd. For example, your firewall related logs are temporarily stored here. So like what I show you in the diagram, in the yellow and the pink areas, even if you don't export your syslogs to SIM server, you already have the two different ways to access your syslogs. Once you enable the SIM server setting, what the system will really do, what change the system will apply to the different devices. Let's look into gateway first. In the SSH, let me show you the processes which are communicating with remote process on port 514. I do see one, and the remote IP address is the one for graylog, right? Perfect. Let's see what's the process name. It's syslog ng. If you watch my previous video about syslog deep dive, you may remember syslog ng is used by Ubiquiti to implement or export the syslogs generated by other applications or processes. If I go to syslog configuration folder under etc syslog ng, you can see there's a folder called configuration.d. In this folder, there are all the configurations for different types of syslogs. And there is particular one. It is for the exporting. This one is exactly the result of what we said on the UniFi network controller about activity logging when we enable SIM server. So let's see what's inside this configuration file. So the very last part defines the source, the filter, and the destination for the remote exporting. Everything before it is just to define the different parts. So let's see what's the source, s_src. In fact, this one is defined in another configuration file. Let me launch a different SSH session so that I can show you the definition for the source in a separate window. In the etc syslog ng folder, there's this general configuration file. So let's look into it. You can see the source is defined here. Two parts, system and internal. They are two drivers for two different sources. System, in fact, is for the syslogs generated in the system. To put another way, if another process writes something to the log device in Linux operating system, a syslog will be generated and it will be part of the system scope, the system driver. Then internal is for the syslog ng itself. So basically this source means everything is part of the initial scope for exporting. So then it will apply a filter to only enable the ones which are supposed to be exported. Then it will remove some special logs that Ubiquiti chooses not to export. For example, the ones related to IP reputation blocking. And then it specifies the destination. What's the destination? It's defined here. See the IP address for graylog, the protocol, which is UDP, and the part we defined. So this is exactly what we configured in the UniFi network application. I believe now it's clear about for gateway, how the syslog exporting works. Then let me proceed to access point. Let me SSH to this U7 Pro XGS access point. So if I show you the processes with name log, you can see this running process. See the parameter? It specifies the remote server IP address, the port number. This is exactly what we specified. As the configuration in activity logging shows, access point is hard-coded to be selected when you export syslogs to SIEM server. That's why we see this running log read process here. If we want to see the locally, internally stored logs for this particular AP, we can go to var log. Then we see this regular messages file. If we VI it, we can see this familiar daemon notice syslogs. Do you remember when we ran the Wireshark previously in our second testing? We did see such syslogs, right? The same log was written to the local storage, the messages file, and exported to the remote graylog because we enabled SIEM server exporting. So this is for access point. Then if we go to a example switch, for example, this USW Pro 24, we show the processes with log in the name. See, we see this one, syslog D. It's a different one than the AP. Because the command line is very long, it's truncated, so we cannot see the complete arguments. Doesn't matter, we can show this configuration file. It's under var run. So you can see this command line include the remote server and the port number, just like what we saw in the AP, right? So in similar way, the switch will also export the syslogs to the remote graylog. We can also go to var log folder. You see the messages log file, just like in the left side AP. So these logs will be exported. Okay, so we have examined 3 different types of UniFi devices, and we see internally what processes are running to export syslogs. Later in the video, I will come back, revisit this setting, especially debug logs. But for now, allow me to switch to another seemingly identical setting. But it's not here for network application. Instead, it's inside the control plane. If you go to integrations, see, it has the same activity logging setting. If you enable SIEM server, you see the almost identical UI. Yes, instead of saying contents, here it says categories. But if you check the options you have, it's almost the same as what we saw in the network application. Then what's going on? Why here for control plane, Ubiquiti has a almost identical setting here? Let's try to understand what's this one at all. To proceed, we need to talk about graylog, about how you can use the same graylog server, the same port number, but support multiple UniFi environments. In the lower left, I show you the graylog UI. So in the system inputs menu, you can go to inputs. I already created one. I call it UniFi, and this is exactly the one we used in our earlier testings. If I show you the details of this input, you can see it binds to this IP address, meaning it will bind to whatever IP address this graylog server has. And then the port number is the default one, and I didn't change anything else, especially for the time zone. I leave it not configured. By default, graylog will use UTC, not my local time zone. Okay, for my setup, I only have one graylog server, but I wanted to serve multiple UniFi systems. In your case, even if you only have one UniFi system. Remember I mentioned even for one UniFi gateway, you have the activity logging settings in both network application and control plane. So which means you already have two different sources for syslogs. And to make the situation even worse, what if you have a UNVR? So here I'm showing you a UNVR Pro. See, under control plane, you also have activity logging setting. And in my case, I set it to the exact same graylog server. So this is UNVR. Then let me show you UNAS Pro. So this is my UNAS Pro. You can see I also enabled SIM server and I use the exact same graylog. So which means it's extremely possible you will face the situation that how you can use the same part, the same graylog server to get data feeds from multiple sources, and internally you still can differentiate the logs from different systems. How you can do that? In graylog, you can set up multiple inputs. So in my case, you can see I have a CEF input, UniFi regular syslog input, and a input for net console. So different input, they must have different ports. That's understandable, right? But no matter how many inputs you have, once graylog receives the syslogs, they will be put in the same pool or storage. Then from the same storage, you can define different streams to do further data analysis. For different inputs, you can see it has a internal long string as a unique ID. Different inputs, they have different IDs. Keep that in mind. Then let me go to streams. You can see I have set up multiple streams already. If I show you the example for my production UniFi gateway, this one, you can see it has multiple rules. So the rules decide whether a message or syslog in the storage is considered part of this stream or not. So let me click on the rule. You can see the first rule is this particular field equals to this value. Apparently this value is what I just talked about, the internal unique ID for a input. So this first rule is very easy to understand. It simply says, okay, you have 3 different inputs, but for this particular stream, I only care about this UniFi input. Then move on. This part, message must not contain UniFi OS. Later you will see this rule is used to differentiate the syslogs, whether it's from network application or from the console. For now, let's move on to the remaining 2. These remaining 2 rules are to filter out the syslogs from these 2 lab environment. See the IP address is the one IP address for the lab environment. So in this way, I make sure when I want to analyze the network application syslogs for the production, I will not see the syslogs from the lab environment. Okay, and then in the same way, I also have a lab UDM Pro activity logging stream. Let's check what are the rules. In similar way, I have the input source. It must be the UniFi. Then in the same way, I say the message must not contain UniFi OS, which means I only care about the network application syslog, not the console syslog. And then the first one, this rule only makes sense in my particular setup because, as I mentioned, this lab 2 is behind this yellow production gateway. Remote IP means which device send the particular syslog. So by using this rule, I'm saying is if the syslog comes from this particular IP address, it must be from this lab environment. Okay, I show you 2 flavors or examples already, right? The first one is for this production network application. The second one is for the lab network application. So in this way, you can set up different streams. Then you can focus on the analysis of a particular system. Having got this cleared, now we can talk about the difference between this particular activity logging setting in control plane and the one in the cyber secure. what are the differences. Let me first disable the setting in network application under the cyber secure. I change it to off. Then let me go to control plane under integrations. Let me enable the SIM server export, and I already selected all the categories. Let's see whether they work at all. Then when it comes to server address, I want to use the same graylog server. However, for port, as I mentioned, this graylog has been receiving syslogs from many other UniFi devices, right? I don't want to interrupt them. So here, let me choose a totally different part just for testing purpose so that we can have a clean environment to start with, right? So let me define a custom part. Let me say 51414. Okay, apply changes. Then in graylog, I need to set up an input to support this custom part. So I go to system input, create a new input. I select the very last option, which is syslog UDP. Give it a name, test lab. Then for part, change it to 51414. Okay, then launch input. Then I need to set up input. Create a stream for this input. Let's simply say test. Next, start input. Okay, it started. Now let me show received message. Let me change the time interval to the past 5 minutes, and here I click 1 second so that I can see the near real-time refresh. Okay, you can see nothing's received. Just to make sure the whole process does work, see in UniFi network controller, we have a send test event for this activity logging, right? So let me test it. Click on it. Okay, see in graylog, we do see a test log. That means the whole process works. But go back to the setting. See, in the categories, I selected all the different categories under network. However, I don't have anything received. That's strange, doesn't make sense, right? And just to furtherly confirm there's something wrong here, remember I did a testing in the beginning of the video to test firewall policy logs, right? Let me redo that simple testing. Let's see whether in graylog we can receive any syslogs. From this VLAN 66 machine, let me ping VLAN 88 exactly as what we did in the beginning of this video. The ping failed, but see in the left side, no syslogs. Even though in the network controller, see for network, I have everything selected, including triggers, but we don't see the syslogs, right? However, we do have some new syslogs sent to graylog. They are about the console, not about network application. Let me show you what I mean. So here I'm under the control plane, right? Which means whatever I change is for the console, not for network. For example, if let's say I disable the device, even though it doesn't make any difference, but let me change it anyway. Save it, apply changes. In graylog, see a syslog is captured. The system did send a syslog to graylog because we enabled the SIM server exporting, right? But this particular syslog is related to console. So let me summarize my understanding about this activity logging setting under control plane. My theory is Ubiquiti did something wrong. There's something either left over or mistakenly copied from the network application, so it includes the categories that it shouldn't include. In my opinion, under the control plane, this setting should only include the categories under UniFi OS. This makes sense. Just to furtherly prove I believe my theory is correct, this is UDM, right? You know UDM has both console and network application, right? However, if I show you, let's say a UNVR Pro, see under control planes for the activity logging setting, if I try to edit categories, it only has the tab for UniFi OS, right? This setting for UNVR Pro makes sense, but the UDM Pro's console setting doesn't make sense. Ubiquiti need to correct that because the current setting really confuses people. Initially, I planned to talk about 3 different trivial settings for activity logging, but because this video is already very long, I decided to separate those 3 smaller topics to a separate video. So thanks for watching.